I'm Sophia Harrison, 34, raising my amazing 10-year-old Lucas alone since his father left 6 years ago. We've always been inseparable, our bond strengthening through every challenge life throws our way. My relationship with my parents, Amanda and Robert, has always been complicated at best. But nothing prepared me for that Thanksgiving dinner when they crossed a line with Lucas that changed everything. My son was already struggling with confidence after being bullied at school. Before I share what happened that night, let me know where you're watching from, and hit that subscribe button if stories about standing up for your children resonate with you. Growing up in the Harrison household meant one thing above all else: appearances mattered. My parents, Amanda and Robert Harrison, built their lives around what others thought of them. Our colonial-style home in Riverside was always immaculate, ready for impromptu visits from my father's business associates or my mother's social circle. My sister Grace and I were expected to be perfect extensions of this carefully curated image. From an early age, I struggled with my parents' expectations. While Grace excelled at everything she touched: piano recitals, debate tournaments, cheerleading, I was the dreamer, more interested in writing stories and exploring the creek behind our house than winning competitions. My parents viewed my personality as a project to fix rather than nurture. "Stand up straight, Sophia," my mother would whisper harshly at social gatherings. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" became the soundtrack of my childhood. When I met Ethan Harrison in college, he represented everything my parents weren't: warm, accepting, and genuinely interested in who I was rather than who I should be. We married young, against my parents' wishes, and Lucas came along 2 years later. For a while, everything was wonderful. Lucas was a bright-eyed, curious baby who grew into a thoughtful, sensitive toddler. But Ethan changed after losing his job at the architectural firm. The pressure of providing for us seemed to crush something inside him. The arguments grew more frequent, his absences longer. When Lucas was 4, Ethan announced he needed space and moved to Seattle for a job opportunity. The divorce was finalized 6 months later, and his visits became increasingly rare until they stopped altogether when Lucas turned 7. Lucas inherited my sensitive nature and creative spirit. At 10, he was a lanky boy with sandy brown hair that constantly fell into his eyes and a collection of freckles across his nose that multiplied every summer. Unlike many boys his age who lived for sports, Lucas found joy in art and science. He could spend hours constructing elaborate models or designing robots from spare parts. After struggling financially for years in Boston, I made the difficult decision to move back to Riverside. The teaching position at the local elementary school offered stability, and despite my reservations about being near my parents again, I believed having some family around would benefit Lucas. "You'll always have a home here," my mother said when I called to tell her about our move. But her next words revealed her true thoughts. "Maybe now we can help you get Lucas on the right track. He needs a male influence, Sophia. Your poor parenting decisions have affected that boy." The first year back in Riverside was harder than I anticipated. Lucas struggled to fit in at his new school. His interests in robotics and art made him a target for some of the more traditionally masculine boys in his grade. Coming home with tears in his eyes became a regular occurrence, though he tried to hide them from me. "Mom, why don't I like the things other boys like?" he asked one evening as I helped him with a science project. "Because you're extraordinary," I told him, pulling him close. "The world needs dreamers and thinkers like you." My sister Grace had followed our parents' life plan perfectly. She married James, a successful surgeon, and had 2 children who excelled at everything they touched. Kimberly, 12, was already being scouted for gymnastics competitions, while Dylan, 14, was the top of his class and quarterback of the junior varsity football team. Grace never missed an opportunity to highlight her children's achievements or subtly compare them to Lucas. "Dylan's coach says he has real potential for a scholarship," she mentioned during one of our rare coffee meetings. "It's so important for boys to have these outlets for their energy. Has Lucas found any sports he enjoys yet?" The pressure of these interactions, combined with my parents' constant criticism of my parenting, created a storm of anxiety that grew as the annual Thanksgiving gathering approached. Every year, the extended Harrison family converged on my parents' home for an elaborate dinner that felt more like a performance than a celebration. "We don't have to go," I told Lucas a week before Thanksgiving, giving him an out. "It's okay, Mom," he replied with a maturity that broke my heart. "Grandma and Grandpa are just old-fashioned, and I want to see Uncle Frank. He always brings cool gadgets." What Lucas didn't say, but I could read in his eyes, was his desperate desire for his grandparents' approval. Despite their coldness, he still yearned for their love, something I understood all too well from my own childhood. The night before Thanksgiving, Lucas worked late into the evening perfecting a small robot he had built from a kit Uncle Frank had given him for his birthday. It could follow simple commands and pick up small objects. The pride in his eyes as he demonstrated it for me was something I wanted to protect at all costs. "Do you think Grandpa will like it?" he asked, his voice small and hopeful. "He'd be crazy not to," I answered, praying it would be true. Thanksgiving Day arrived with unusual warmth for late November. Lucas wore his nicest button-down shirt and even allowed me to tame his perpetually messy hair with a bit of gel. The small robot was carefully packed in a shoebox, wrapped in tissue paper like the treasure it was. "You look so handsome," I told him, adjusting his collar as we stood on my parents' doorstep. The familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my stomach as I rang the bell. My mother answered, her silver blonde hair perfectly styled and her cream cashmere sweater without a wrinkle. Her eyes quickly assessed us both. "Sophia, dear, you look comfortable," she said, her gaze lingering on my simple dress. "And Lucas, my goodness, you've grown taller. Still so thin, though. Doesn't your mother feed you?" She laughed as if it were a joke, but Lucas's smile faltered. The house was filled with the familiar sense of Thanksgiving roasting turkey, cinnamon, and the distinctive smell of my mother's signature potpourri. Family members were already gathered in the living room, drinks in hand and conversation flowing. Aunt Marlene, my mother's sister, greeted us warmly. Unlike my mother, Aunt Marlene had laugh lines around her eyes and hugged with genuine affection. "Lucas, you handsome devil. Come tell your favorite aunt what you've been up to." Uncle Frank, my father's brother and the family eccentric, winked at Lucas from across the room. A retired engineer with a perpetual 5 o'clock shadow and mismatched socks, he was Lucas's favorite relative. "The young inventor arrives," he called out. "I've got something in my car for you later." My sister Grace air-kissed my cheek, her diamond earrings catching the light. "Sophia, you look well rested," she said, echoing our mother's tone. "The school must be giving you plenty of time off." Her husband James barely looked up from his phone, offering a distracted handshake. Their children, Kimberly and Dylan, were showcasing their latest achievements to my father in the corner, Kimberly performing a gymnastics move in the middle of the living room while Dylan explained something about his football statistics. Lucas, my father finally acknowledged, looking up from his grandchildren's display. "How's school?" "It's good, Grandpa," Lucas replied eagerly. "I'm in the science club now, and I brought something to show you later." My father's expression remained impassive. "Science club, huh? Well, I suppose that's something. Dylan here just broke the school record for passing yards." Lucas's face fell slightly, but he nodded politely. "That's really cool, Dylan." I placed a protective hand on Lucas's shoulder, guiding him toward the appetizer table. "Let's get some food, buddy. I see Grandma put out those little quiches you like." The initial small talk continued as we moved around the room. Every conversation seemed to contain a hidden barb or subtle criticism. My mother questioned my job security at the school. Grace wondered aloud why I hadn't put myself back out there dating-wise. Uncle Frank was the only one who showed genuine interest in our lives, asking Lucas about his robot projects and science club activities. When we were called to dinner, the seating arrangement made my heart sink. Lucas and I were separated. He was placed between Dylan and my father, while I was at the opposite end near my mother and Aunt Marlene. I caught Lucas's eye across the table and gave him an encouraging smile, which he returned weakly. The elaborate spread was typical of my mother's, entertaining a perfectly brown turkey, cranberry sauce made from scratch, at least 6 different sides, and 3 types of pie waiting on the sideboard. It looked like a magazine feature rather than a family meal. Before we begin, my father announced, standing to carve the turkey, "I'd like to say how grateful I am that we're all here together. Family is the most important thing." His eyes swept the table, lingering on me, even when some of us make choices that are unconventional. The dinner began with my mother's interrogation of everyone's lives since they last met. Grace and James's recent vacation to the Maldives, Dylan's football prospects, Kimberly's gymnastics competition. When the conversation turned to Lucas and me, the questions became sharper. "How are you managing financially, Sophia?" my mother asked, her voice dripping with concern that wasn't really concern. "Teaching doesn't pay much, and with Ethan being..." "Well, Ethan, we're doing just fine," I replied, cutting my turkey with more force than necessary. "The school has great benefits, and we've made our apartment really cozy." "Apartment," my mother repeated, as if the word itself was distasteful. "Well, at least it's temporary, I hope." Lucas tried several times to join the conversation, but was repeatedly talked over or ignored. I watched him shrink a little more with each attempt, pushing his food around his plate rather than eating it. When Dylan began boasting about intimidating a smaller kid on an opposing football team, Lucas's expression grew increasingly uncomfortable. "That's enough, Dylan," Uncle Frank interjected surprisingly. "There's no honor in using your size to scare others." My father chuckled. "Frank, boys will be boys. Dylan's just showing some healthy competitive spirit." "I don't think it's healthy," Lucas said quietly, and the table went momentarily silent at his unexpected comment. "Well," my father said with a dismissive wave, "when you've never played a real sport, I suppose you wouldn't understand the dynamics." The tension at the table was palpable. I caught Lucas's eye again and mouthed, "You okay?" He nodded, but I could see the hurt behind his brave face. "Lucas," Uncle Frank said, clearly trying to change the subject, "tell everyone about that robot you've been working on." Lucas's eyes lit up at Uncle Frank's invitation. He straightened in his chair, a glimmer of excitement replacing the dejection that had settled on his features throughout dinner. "I finished building a programmable robot last week," he began, his voice gaining confidence. "It can follow simple commands and pick up small objects. I programmed it myself using the coding book Uncle Frank gave me." "You brought it, right?" Uncle Frank encouraged. "Maybe you could show everyone after dinner." "Actually, I have it here," Lucas said, reaching down for the shoebox beneath his chair. With careful hands, he removed the tissue paper and placed his creation on the table beside his plate. The robot was about the size of a small toaster, constructed from a kit, but with several creative modifications Lucas had added himself. The LED lights blinked in patterns as he switched it on. "It's got sensors here and here," he explained, pointing to the front of the robot. "And I modified the gripping mechanism so it can pick up things as small as a paperclip or as big as an apple." For a moment, the table was attentive. Even Dylan looked somewhat interested. Lucas's face glowed with pride as he demonstrated how the robot could navigate around obstacles on the table. Then my father snorted. "Is that what they're teaching in science club these days?" he said, his voice thick with mockery. He picked up a salt shaker and mimicked the robot's movements in an exaggerated way. "Beep boop, I'm a robot," he said in a high-pitched voice meant to imitate Lucas. My mother's laugh came first, a tittering sound that she partially covered with her napkin. Then Grace joined in, followed by her husband James and finally Dylan, who laughed the loudest. "Honestly, Sophia," my mother said between chuckles, "couldn't you encourage him to do something more practical? He's so sensitive, just like you were. It doesn't serve boys well in the real world." Lucas's hands trembled as he reached for his robot. His face had gone from animated to frozen, a deep red flush creeping up his neck and into his cheeks. "He's just a kid," my father declared with a dismissive wave. "He'll get over it. Boys need to toughen up if they're going to make it in this world." "That's enough," I said sharply, finding my voice. "Lucas has every right to pursue his interests without being mocked for them." "Oh, Sophia, don't be so dramatic," Grace interjected. "Dad's just having a little fun. Lucas needs to learn to take a joke." Lucas's fork clattered against his plate as it slipped from his fingers. His eyes, swimming with unshed tears, met mine across the table. The look of betrayal and hurt was so acute it felt like a physical pain in my chest. "Lucas worked really hard on that robot," I continued, my voice rising. "He's shown incredible dedication and creativity, which are qualities that should be encouraged, not ridiculed." "Here we go again," my father sighed dramatically. "This is why the boy is so soft, Sophia. You coddle him too much." James, Grace's husband, who had barely spoken all evening, decided this was his moment to contribute. "Boys these days aren't being raised right. They need discipline and traditional male influences. No offense, Sophia, but single mothers just can't provide that." The table fell silent. Lucas's hands were now flat on the table, his shoulders rigid. Something shifted in his expression. The hurt was still there, but something else had joined it. Determination. Slowly, deliberately, Lucas stood up. At 10 years old, he wasn't very tall, but in that moment, he seemed to grow inches before my eyes. "I'll never forget this," he said, his voice clear and steady despite the slight quiver of his chin. "Not what you said, not how you laughed, and not how it made me feel." The table went completely silent. My father's mocking smile froze. My mother's eyes widened. Even Dylan stopped snickering. "Lucas," my father started, his tone suddenly conciliatory, but Lucas had already carefully placed his robot back in its box and was walking out of the dining room. I stood up immediately, my napkin falling to the floor. "How dare you," I said, looking directly at my parents. "How dare you humiliate a child, your own grandson, for having passions and interests that don't fit your narrow view of what a boy should be?" "Sophia, you're overreacting," my mother said, her voice tight. "It was just a bit of family teasing. Every child needs to learn to handle criticism." "That wasn't criticism," Uncle Frank spoke up unexpectedly. "That was cruelty, Amanda. And Robert, I expected better from you." "Stay out of this, Frank," my father warned. "No, I don't think I will," Uncle Frank replied calmly. "I've stayed out of it for too many years, watching how you treat Sophia and now Lucas. It stops today." I felt a surge of gratitude toward Uncle Frank, but my focus remained on Lucas. "I'm going to check on my son," I said. "And then we're leaving." "Don't be ridiculous," my mother hissed. "It's Thanksgiving. You can't just leave in the middle of dinner because of a little hurt feelings." "Watch me," I replied, turning toward the door. "Sophia Marie Harrison," my father's authoritative voice boomed. "If you walk out that door with that boy right now, don't bother coming back." I turned slowly to face him. "Is that supposed to be a threat, Dad? Because from where I'm standing, not coming back sounds like the healthiest choice I could make for Lucas and myself." I found Lucas sitting on the steps of the front porch, hugging his robot box to his chest. Without a word, I sat beside him and put my arm around his shoulders. We stayed like that for several minutes, the sounds of arguing voices floating through the dining room windows. "I'm sorry, Lucas," I finally said. "I'm so sorry they treated you that way." "It's not your fault, Mom," he replied, his voice small but steady. "Can we go home now?" "Absolutely," I said, standing and offering him my hand. "We never have to come back here if you don't want to." As we walked to the car, I heard the front door open behind us. I turned, half expecting to see my parents, but it was Uncle Frank, carrying our coats and a small bag. "You forgot these," he said, handing me the coats. "And I packed some pie for later. That boy deserves something sweet after what happened in there." He knelt down to Lucas's level. "I'm proud of you, kiddo." Standing up for yourself like that takes real courage. More courage than anyone else showed at that table today. Lucas managed a small smile. Thanks, Uncle Frank. I'll call you tomorrow, Uncle Frank told me quietly. This has been a long time coming, Sophia. You're doing the right thing. As we drove away from my parents' house, the silence in the car was heavy with unshed tears and unspoken words. Lucas stared out the window, clutching his robot box like a lifeline. The drive home felt endless. Streetlights cast intermittent shadows across Lucas's face as he stared out the passenger window. Neither of us spoke. The weight of what had happened seemed too heavy for words. I kept glancing at him, searching for signs of how deeply the wound had cut, but his expression remained carefully neutral, a mask no 10-year-old should have to wear. When we finally reached our apartment building, Lucas unbuckled his seatbelt but didn't move to get out of the car. Mom, his voice was barely audible. Are they right about me? The question shattered my heart. I turned off the engine and shifted to face him fully. Lucas, look at me, I said gently. He turned, his eyes swimming with tears he'd been holding back all evening. Your grandparents are wrong. So wrong. There is nothing, absolutely nothing wrong with who you are. You're creative, intelligent, and kind. Those are strengths, not weaknesses. His bottom lip trembled. But Grandpa said boys need to be tough. Dylan doesn't get bullied at school. Maybe if I was more like him. Do you really want to be like Dylan? I asked. Someone who thinks it's okay to intimidate smaller kids? Is that the kind of person you admire? Lucas considered this, then slowly shook his head. The world needs all kinds of people, Lucas. It needs artists and scientists and dreamers just as much as it needs athletes. Maybe even more. We sat in silence for another moment before heading upstairs to our apartment. Once inside, Lucas placed his robot carefully on the coffee table, then suddenly collapsed onto the couch, the dam finally breaking. His sobs were gut-wrenching deep, body-shaking cries that seemed to come from somewhere primal. I held him against my chest, rocking slightly as I had when he was smaller. Let it out, I whispered. It's okay to be hurt. It's okay to cry. When his sobs finally subsided to hiccups and shaky breaths, he pulled away slightly. It wasn't just tonight, Mom, he confessed, wiping his nose with his sleeve. They always do that. When you go to help Grandma in the kitchen or when you're talking to Aunt Marlene. Grandpa and Dylan make fun of me. They've been doing it every time we visit. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All those times I'd left Lucas alone with my father, thinking they were bonding, he'd been enduring ridicule and humiliation. Why didn't you tell me? I asked, struggling to keep my voice steady. I didn't want you to be upset, he said with a shrug that broke my heart all over again. And I thought maybe if I just tried harder, they'd like me eventually. I pulled him close again. This is not your problem to fix, Lucas. You shouldn't have to change who you are to earn love from your family. That's not how love is supposed to work. We stayed up late, talking more openly than we ever had before. Lucas shared other painful memories, comments my father had made about his art, the way my mother constantly compared him to Dylan, how Grace's children excluded him from their games. Each revelation fueled a growing anger inside me, but also a resolve to protect my son from further harm. Around midnight, my phone chimed with a text from Grace. Way to overreact and ruin Thanksgiving. Mom is upset and Dad is furious. You always make everything about you. Lucas needs to learn to take a joke and not be so sensitive. James says that's why he'll struggle in life. I turned off my phone without responding. That night, sleep eluded me. I replayed every visit to my parents' house, searching for signs I'd missed, moments when Lucas might have been suffering while I remained oblivious. The weight of my failure to protect him pressed on my chest like a stone. Morning came after a restless night. I found Lucas already awake, sitting cross-legged on the living room floor, making adjustments to his robot. He looked up when I entered, his expression serious beyond his years. I don't want to go back there, Mom, he said simply. We don't have to, sweetheart. Are you mad at them? He asked. I considered my answer carefully. I'm disappointed in them. And I'm angry about how they treated you. But mostly I'm sad that they can't see how amazing you are just as you are. I was pouring coffee when the doorbell rang. Given the early hour, I knew exactly who it would be. My father rarely allowed conflicts to simmer. He preferred to impose his resolution immediately and decisively. Sure enough, when I opened the door, Robert Harrison stood in the hallway, his posture rigid and his expression stern. He was dressed impeccably as always, not a silver hair out of place. Sophia, he said by way of greeting. This has gone on long enough. Your mother is upset. Dinner was ruined, and I expect you to bring Lucas back today for leftover dinner to smooth things over. No apology. No acknowledgement of what had happened. Just the expectation that we would fall in line as we always had before. That's not going to happen, Dad, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Not without a genuine apology to Lucas and a commitment to treat him with respect going forward. My father's expression darkened. This is ridiculous. We were just having a little family fun. The boy needs to toughen up, and you're not doing him any favors by coddling him. It wasn't fun for Lucas, I countered. It was humiliating. And he deserves better from his grandparents. Well, he'll have to get over it, my father insisted. That's what family does. We move past these things. Not this time, I said firmly. Not without real change. What happened next caught both my father and me by surprise. The sound of footsteps behind me made me turn, and there stood Lucas in his pajamas, clutching his robot. Hi, Grandpa, he said quietly. My father's expression softened marginally. Lucas. Good morning. I was just telling your mother that we expect you both back for dinner today. Your grandmother made your favorite pumpkin pie. I started to step in front of Lucas protectively, but he moved beside me instead, his shoulder touching my hip. I don't want to come back, Lucas said, his voice small but clear. Not after what happened yesterday. My father's eyebrows shot up, clearly not expecting direct confrontation from his 10-year-old grandson. Now, Lucas, it was just a bit of teasing. Family teases each other. It's how we show love. Lucas shook his head slowly. That's not love, Grandpa. It hurt me. It always hurts me when you and Dylan make fun of the things I like. We're just trying to help you grow up to be a strong man, my father insisted, his tone becoming patronizing. The world isn't kind to sensitive boys. Maybe the world should be kinder. Then, Lucas replied, looking directly at his grandfather. My science teacher says my robot design was one of the most creative she's seen. My art teacher put my drawing in the school showcase. The things you laugh at are the things other people think are good about me. My father's mouth opened and closed, momentarily at a loss for words. I placed my hand on Lucas's shoulder, overwhelmed with pride at his articulate defense of himself. Lucas, I understand you're upset, my father finally said, switching tactics. But family is family. We stick together no matter what. Your grandmother and I have certain expectations, and one of them is that we don't hold grudges. I'm not holding a grudge, Lucas said thoughtfully. I just don't want to be around people who make me feel bad about myself. Mom says I shouldn't have to earn love by changing who I am. My father's face reddened. Sophia, this is your influence. You're turning him against us with these modern parenting notions. No, Dad, I interjected. I'm teaching him self-respect and boundaries. Something I wish I'd learned much earlier in life. This is absurd, my father huffed. Robert Harrison's family does not do boundaries. We are loyal to each other above all else. Even when that loyalty hurts someone? Lucas asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. My father stared at Lucas as if seeing him for the first time. You don't understand adult matters, boy. This conversation is between your mother and me. But it's about me, Lucas persisted. Shouldn't I get a say in how people treat me? The simple logic of a child seemed to stump my father momentarily. Then his expression hardened again. Sophia, this has gone far enough. Either you bring Lucas to dinner today and we put this nonsense behind us, or you'll both regret it. Family loyalty isn't optional. I felt a calm certainty settle over me. You're right about one thing, Dad. Family loyalty isn't optional. I'm being loyal to my family right now, to Lucas and myself. We deserve respect, not ridicule. We deserve love without conditions. This is your final answer? My father demanded. It is, I confirmed. Until you're ready to truly see and accept Lucas for who he is, not who you want him to be, we won't be coming back. Then you've made your choice, he said coldly. Don't expect your mother and me to bail you out next time you're struggling financially or need help with the boy. You're on your own. We always have been, I replied softly. Lucas reached for my hand as I gently closed the door on my father's thunderous expression. The finality of the soft click seemed to echo in our small apartment. Are you okay, Mom? Lucas asked, concern evident in his eyes. I knelt down to his level. I'm more than okay, Lucas. I'm proud. Proud of you for standing up for yourself, and proud of us for choosing what's healthy over what's familiar. What happens now? He asked. Now, I said, smiling despite the heaviness in my heart, we make our own Thanksgiving traditions. Just the two of us. Later that morning, as I mixed pancake batter while Lucas set the table, my phone rang. It was Uncle Frank. I heard what happened with Robert this morning, he said without preamble. He's on the warpath. How did you know? I asked. I stopped by your parents' house to give them a piece of my mind about last night. Robert was just getting back and ranting about ungrateful children and disrespectful grandsons. Uncle Frank's chuckle held no humor. I wanted to check that you and Lucas are okay. We're managing, I said, watching Lucas carefully arrange 2 place settings at our small kitchen table. It was harder than I expected, standing up to him like that. 68 years I've known my brother, Uncle Frank sighed. And in all that time, I've never seen him admit he was wrong about anything. But Sophia, that doesn't mean you're not right. What you did today took courage. Lucas was the brave one, I said. That's because he has you showing him how it's done, Uncle Frank replied. Listen, I'm having my own little rebellion against the Harrison family regime. I'm going to order Chinese food and watch football in my underwear instead of attending the leftovers dinner. How about I bring some food over to you two later? For the first time since the disastrous dinner, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. We'd like that very much. Throughout the day, messages continued to arrive. A series of texts from my mother alternating between guilt trips and veiled threats. A surprisingly thoughtful email from Aunt Marlene acknowledging how poorly Lucas had been treated and apologizing for not speaking up. A terse voicemail from Grace reiterating that I was overreacting. I responded to none of them, focusing instead on creating a new kind of day with Lucas. We built a blanket fort in the living room, baked cookies, and watched his favorite science fiction movies. When Uncle Frank arrived with enough Chinese food to feed a small army, we welcomed him into our makeshift celebration. To new traditions, Uncle Frank toasted, raising his glass of soda. To being ourselves, Lucas added, clinking his glass against his great-uncle's. As I watched them laugh together, something tight and painful that had lived in my chest for as long as I could remember began to loosen. For the first time, I could see clearly that family wasn't defined by blood or obligation, but by respect, acceptance, and genuine love. And by that definition, our little gathering of 3 was more of a family than anything I'd experienced in my parents' grand house. The week following Thanksgiving unfolded in unexpected ways. My phone continued to buzz with messages from family members, but I maintained my distance, needing time to process what had happened and determine the best path forward for Lucas and me. On Monday afternoon, I scheduled an appointment with Dr. Alicia Wright, a family therapist recommended by the school counselor. I sat in her warmly lit office, surrounded by plants and calming artwork, and poured out the entire story. What you're describing is a pattern of emotional dismissal that likely goes back generations in your family, Dr. Wright explained after listening intently. Breaking these patterns isn't easy, but it's absolutely possible, especially when the motivation is protecting your child. I just don't know if I'm doing the right thing, I admitted. Cutting them off completely feels so final. Setting boundaries isn't the same as cutting people off, she clarified. Boundaries communicate what you will and won't accept in how you're treated. The ball is then in their court to respect those boundaries or not. Over the next hour, Dr. Wright helped me craft a clear set of boundaries for my parents and sister. We scheduled another session for the following week, with the possibility of including Lucas in future meetings if he felt comfortable. That evening, Lucas's science teacher, Mrs. Finley, called with news that surprised us both. Lucas has been different at school this week, she said. More confident, more willing to share his ideas in class. Whatever you're doing at home, it's working. I hung up feeling a mixture of pride and sadness, proud of Lucas's resilience, but sad that it had taken such a painful experience to catalyze his growth. A few days later, an unexpected letter arrived in the mail. It was from Aunt Marlene, handwritten on her personal stationery. Dear Sophia and Lucas, it began. I've been reflecting deeply on what happened at Thanksgiving, and I feel compelled to offer my sincere apology. I witnessed the humiliation of a child and remained silent. There is no excuse for that. The Harrison family has long perpetuated patterns of criticism disguised as character building, and I've been complicit in it. Your courage in standing up to Robert has forced me to examine my own role in maintaining these toxic dynamics. Please know that I support your decision to establish boundaries, and I'm working on some of my own. With love and regret, Aunt Marlene. I read the letter to Lucas over breakfast. What do you think about that? I asked him. He considered for a moment, stirring his cereal thoughtfully. I think Aunt Marlene might be the bravest grown-up in our family besides you, Mom. It's hard to say you're wrong. His insight, so simple yet profound, reminded me again of the remarkable person he was becoming. The following weekend, I made a difficult decision. After consulting with Dr. Wright, I drafted a clear, firm email to my parents outlining our boundaries. We would consider rebuilding a relationship only if they acknowledged the harm they had caused, committed to treating Lucas with respect, and agreed to family therapy sessions. I hit send before I could lose my nerve, then took Lucas to the park to clear my head. While Lucas was climbing the jungle gym, I received a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was from Walter Miller, Lucas's science teacher's husband, who ran the local robotics club. Mrs. Finley mentioned your son's interest in robotics. We have an opening in our Saturday morning club, if he'd like to join. No pressure, but the kids are working on some cool projects he might enjoy. That afternoon, I took Lucas to meet Mr. Miller and see the robotics club in action. The transformation in my son was immediate and beautiful to witness. Here, surrounded by other children who shared his interests, Lucas's entire demeanor changed. His shoulders relaxed, his smile came easily, and his eyes lit up as he examined the projects other kids were working on. Can I join, Mom? Please, he asked, practically bouncing with excitement. Absolutely, I replied, feeling a weight lift from my heart. This looks perfect for you. December arrived with no response from my parents to my email, but an avalanche of texts and calls from Grace. I finally agreed to meet her for coffee, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. The upscale cafe Grace chose was typical of her, trendy, expensive, and designed to impress. She was already seated when I arrived, her designer handbag placed prominently on the table. Finally, she sighed as I sat down. I was beginning to think you'd gone completely off the grid. Just taking some space to think, I replied evenly. Well, you've certainly thrown the family into chaos, she said, stirring her latte. Mom barely leaves her room, and Dad is on a rampage. Christmas is going to be a disaster. I'm sorry they're struggling, I said sincerely. But I had to make a choice between keeping the peace and protecting my son. Don't you think you're being a little dramatic? Grace asked, her perfectly manicured eyebrows rising. It was just some harmless teasing. Lucas needs to develop a thicker skin. Would you say the same if it were Kimberly or Dylan being mocked by the family? Grace's expression faltered momentarily. That's different. Why? Because they fit into the mold of what mom and dad think children should be? Because they don't challenge anyone's comfort zone. Because they understand how to behave in family settings, Grace insisted. They know their place. The phrase struck me like a physical blow. Their place? Do you hear yourself, Grace? Children aren't supposed to know their place. They're supposed to be loved and encouraged to become themselves. Oh, spare me the modern parenting lecture, Grace scoffed. Some of us still believe in traditional values and respect for elders. Respect should go both ways, I countered. And love shouldn't be conditional on a child conforming to some arbitrary standard. Our conversation continued in circles, neither of us truly hearing the other. But as I drove home, I realized something important had shifted inside me. For the first time, I didn't leave an encounter with Grace feeling diminished or defensive. I felt secure in my convictions and choices. 2 weeks before Christmas, holiday cards began arriving. Among them was a thick envelope from my parents. Inside was a standard card with a family photo from last year's holiday gathering and a check for $500 with "For Lucas Christmas" written in the memo line. No note, no acknowledgement of our rift. Just money, as if a check could bridge the chasm that had opened between us. I returned it the next day with a brief note. Thank you, but we're not looking for financial support. What Lucas needs is acceptance and respect. That evening, Lucas came home from school bursting with news. Mom, my team qualified for the regional robotics competition in January. Mr. Miller says our design is really innovative. His excitement was contagious. We celebrated with pizza and ice cream, and as I watched him chattering animatedly about circuit boards and programming languages, I knew without doubt that protecting this spirit, this authentic, passionate, brilliant spirit, was worth any family fallout. Christmas approached, and for the first time in my life, I wouldn't be spending it at my parents' house. The realization brought both sadness and liberation. Lucas and I decided to create our own traditions. We bought a small tree and decorated it with homemade ornaments, planned a special Christmas Eve dinner, and arranged to volunteer at the local animal shelter on Christmas morning. This is going to be the best Christmas ever, Lucas declared as he hung a robot ornament he'd crafted from spare parts on our tree. Looking at his hopeful face, I silently vowed to make it so. 2 days before Christmas, an unexpected call came from my mother. I answered with trepidation. Sophia, she said, her voice lacking its usual confidence. I'm calling because, well, your father had a minor heart episode yesterday. My breath caught. Is he okay? Yes, just a scare. The doctor says it was stress-related. The accusation was implied but not stated. He's supposed to rest and avoid upset. I waited, sensing there was more to this call than health updates. We'd still like you and Lucas to come for Christmas, she finally said. It would mean a lot to your father, given the circumstances. The old guilt began to creep in, but I remembered Dr. Wright's words about emotional manipulation. I'm genuinely sorry about Dad's health scare, I said carefully. But our boundaries haven't changed. Has Dad read my email? Is he willing to acknowledge how his behavior affected Lucas? My mother's sigh was heavy with disappointment. Sophia, your father is not well. Is this really the time for ultimatums? It's not an ultimatum, Mom. It's a boundary. There's a difference. Well, your boundary might cost you a relationship with your father, she said, her voice hardening. Is that what you want? The question hung in the air between us. Was it what I wanted? Of course not. I wanted parents who could see and value my son for who he was. I wanted family gatherings free from tension and criticism. I wanted Lucas to have loving grandparents in his life. But not at the cost of his self-worth. Not at the expense of his spirit. What I want, I said slowly, is for Dad to get well. And for both of you to consider whether having a relationship with your grandson is worth examining your own behavior. The choice isn't mine alone to make. After hanging up, I sat in the quiet of our apartment, emotions swirling. The weight of family expectations and patterns was heavy, but for the first time, I felt strong enough to carry it without buckling. 3 months after the Thanksgiving incident, Lucas stood nervously beside his science fair display at Riverside Elementary. His robot, now significantly upgraded, sat proudly on the table surrounded by charts explaining its design and function. The judges were making their way through the exhibits, clipboards in hand. "You've got this," I whispered, giving his shoulder a squeeze. "No matter what happens, I'm incredibly proud of you." Lucas nodded, taking a deep breath. When the judges reached his table, he launched into his explanation with confidence I hadn't seen before the Thanksgiving confrontation. He answered their questions thoughtfully, demonstrating his robot's capabilities with steady hands. That afternoon, when they announced the winners, Lucas's name was called for first place in the engineering category. The smile that broke across his face as he accepted his trophy was worth every difficult moment of the past months. "I did it, Mom," he exclaimed as he ran back to me, trophy clutched tightly in his hands. "You sure did," I replied, pulling him into a hug. "You were amazing up there." As we packed up his project, I reflected on the journey we'd taken since November. The path hadn't been easy, but the changes in Lucas were remarkable. He stood taller, spoke more confidently, and most importantly, seemed comfortable in his own skin in a way he hadn't been before. Our relationship with my parents remained complicated. After my father's health scare, I'd sent flowers and called regularly for updates, maintaining caring contact while still upholding our boundaries. It was a delicate balance, one I sometimes struggled to maintain. 2 weeks after the science fair, I received a surprising call from my mother. "Sophia," she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant. "Your father and I have been doing some thinking. We'd like to come see Lucas's robot demonstration if the invitation is still open." Lucas had mentioned wanting to show his grandparents his science fair project, but I had never actually extended an invitation. My mother's revisionist history was typical, but rather than point it out, I focused on the opportunity presented. "I'd need to check with Lucas first," "Of course," my mother said, another unexpected concession. "We understand." When I asked Lucas that evening, his reaction surprised me. "I'd like them to come," he said after considering it. "But I don't want them to say mean things about my robot again." "I'll make sure they understand that," I promised. The following Saturday, my parents arrived at our apartment. My father looked thinner than I remembered, his normally commanding presence somewhat diminished. My mother carried a gift bag. "Hello, Sophia," my father said formally. "Thank you for having us." The stiff greeting was a far cry from his usual confident declarations, but it was a start. Lucas emerged from his room, robot in hand. "Hi, Grandma. Hi, Grandpa," he said cautiously. "Lucas," my mother stepped forward, offering the gift bag. "We brought you something." Inside was a sophisticated robotics kit, the kind Lucas had mentioned wanting months ago. "Thank you," he said, genuine appreciation in his voice despite his lingering wariness. "Your mother tells us you won a science fair," my father said, making an effort to sound interested. "We'd like to see your project, if that's all right." Lucas glanced at me, and I nodded encouragingly. He set up his robot on the coffee table and began explaining its features and functions. I watched my parents closely, alert for any signs of dismissal or mockery. But something had shifted. They listened attentively, asked appropriate questions, and when Lucas demonstrated the robot's capabilities, my father actually looked impressed. "That's remarkable engineering for someone your age," he said when Lucas finished. "You must have put a lot of work into this." Lucas's face lit up at the genuine praise. "I did. Mr. Miller from Robotics Club helped me with some of the programming, but I designed and built it myself." "You should be proud," my mother added. "It's quite an accomplishment." The visit continued with cautious conversation, like people speaking different languages, trying to find common ground. Before they left, my father asked to speak with me privately. In the kitchen, away from Lucas and my mother, he cleared his throat uncomfortably. Sophia, I want you to know that I've been seeing someone. A doctor. For emotional issues. The admission clearly cost him. After my heart episode, the cardiologist suggested it might help with stress. I was stunned into silence. My father, Robert Harrison, who believed therapy was for the weak, was seeing a therapist. He says I have something called rigid thinking patterns, my father continued with a frown. And that my generation was taught to suppress emotions rather than express them. It's all rather new age for my taste, but he paused, looking uncharacteristically vulnerable. I don't want to lose my relationship with you and Lucas. It wasn't an apology, but coming from my father, it was an extraordinary concession. That means a lot to hear, Dad, I said carefully. Would you be open to a family session sometime? With Lucas and me? He nodded stiffly. If that's what it takes. After my parents left, do you think they're really changing? He asked. I think they're trying, I answered honestly. And that's a start. But real change takes time and effort. Like programming a robot. I smiled at his apt analogy. Exactly like that. And we don't have to rush anything. We can take it slow and see how it goes. Over the next month, we began the careful work of rebuilding family relationships on new terms. My mother called regularly with genuine questions about Lucas's activities. My father attended his therapy sessions and even agreed to a family session with Dr. Wright, though he sat stiffly throughout and spoke little. Grace remained distant, uncomfortable with the shifting family dynamics that challenged her worldview. But Uncle Frank became a more regular presence in our lives, taking Lucas to robotics competitions and offering the kind of unconditional support that family should provide. In late April, Lucas's robotics team qualified for the state competition. When I mentioned it during a phone call with my mother, she immediately said, "We'd like to attend, if that's all right with Lucas." The competition was held in a large convention center 2 hours away. Lucas was a bundle of nerves and excitement as he prepared with his team. I scanned the audience, not really expecting my parents to show up despite their stated intention. But there they were, sitting awkwardly in the bleachers, my father consulting the program with a furrowed brow. When they spotted us, my mother waved tentatively. "Your parents came," I told Lucas, pointing them out. He took a deep breath. "Is it okay if I go say hi before we start?" Of course, I assured him. I watched as he walked over to my parents. My father, after a moment's hesitation, put his hand on Lucas's shoulder, not the crushing grip of dominance he'd used in the past, but a gentle touch of support. My mother actually hugged him, something I rarely saw her do. Lucas returned to his team. His team didn't win the competition, placing third in their division. But as we gathered afterward, Lucas surrounded by his teammates and my parents standing somewhat uncertainly to the side, I realized we had all won something more important. "I've been thinking," Lucas said as we drove home that evening, my parents following in their car to join us for dinner, "about what happened at Thanksgiving and everything since then." "What have you been thinking?" I asked. "That it's okay to love someone but still not accept how they treat you," he said. "And that sometimes people can change if you give them a chance, but you don't have to let them hurt you while you're waiting." Tears pricked my eyes at his wisdom. "That's exactly right, Lucas. That's what setting boundaries is all about." "And Mom," he added, looking out at the passing landscape, "thanks for standing up for me that day. It helped me learn how to stand up for myself." In that moment, I understood the profound truth that had been revealed through our painful family journey. Standing up for our children doesn't just protect them in the moment, it teaches them to protect themselves for a lifetime. That night, the journey wasn't over. My parents still struggled with old habits. Grace remained resistant to change. But we were moving forward on a foundation of mutual respect rather than fear and obligation. As parents, we often focus on teaching our children about the world, but sometimes the most important lessons come when they watch us navigate it ourselves, when they see us set boundaries, demand respect, and choose authentic relationships over comfortable patterns. What's your experience with family boundaries? Have you ever had to stand up for your child against other family members? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this resonated with you, please like and subscribe to join our community of parents committed to breaking unhealthy cycles and building stronger families. Thank you for being here with me today, and remember, sometimes the bravest thing we can do for our children is to show them how to be brave for themselves.